Sir, Singapore's most pressing foreign policy challenge today is managing escalating rivalry between the United States and China. As a small state with an open economy, Singapore is highly vulnerable to disruptions from this great power competition. Balancing strong military and economic ties with the US with deep economic links with China requires careful diplomacy, strategic autonomy, and economic adaptability. To mitigate these risks, Singapore should diversify its economy by strengthening trade and investment ties with ASEAN and the EU, as well as with India, Japan, South Korea, and other growing economies, ensuring that these relationships are based on stable and predictable legal and institutional frameworks. Changes in US engagement in China and rising military tensions with China, I'll say that again, changes in US engagement in Asia and rising military tensions with China create new security challenges for Singapore. To strengthen its defense resilience, Singapore should strengthen its defense partnership with the US while expanding security cooperation with more countries, including some of our neighbors in Southeast Asia. At the same time, Singapore must continue to building up the capability and competence of the SAF to ensure it remains a credible deterrent against emerging threats. Building diplomatic goodwill through bilateral engagement and assistance will also be important in winning international support for Singapore in times of crisis. MFA should expand efforts to educate businesses, NGOs, and the public about our strategic interests through town halls and closed-door briefings. It could also make better use of social media, podcasts, and short videos to ensure foreign policy messaging reaches wider domestic and international audiences. Could the Minister outline what MFA is doing in these areas and how it plans to strengthen such efforts? Thank you, sir. Sir, the Minister has highlighted the profound implications of the shifting global order on Singapore, and I share his concerns. However, beyond the risks and the threats, what opportunities can Singapore seize in this new environment? How is the government positioning us to be able to benefit from these changes? For instance, as the global power dynamics shift, smaller and medium-sized countries may be open to seeking closer economic and security ties with Singapore. Is the government stepping up its outreach to these nations by expanding its network of overseas missions and trade offices? Secondly, the Minister highlighted our deep reliance on both the US and China, economically for both and on security for the US. However, he did not address how we plan to reduce the risks of over-dependence on them. Does the government have a plan for that? And lastly, I think the Minister did not respond to my cut about the public diplomacy front. How is MFA stepping up the public diplomacy front and using that to be able to explain to Singaporeans about our strategic interests? Thank you.
The last supplementary question we'll handle later because my colleague, Second Minister Maliki, has not spoken yet. But let me focus on the first part of your question. What are the opportunities? As I said just now, I spent a lot of time making the point that this is a period of great change and great danger. But I hope you also, glean from my speech that this is not a call for pessimism because there are opportunities. So what are these opportunities? The first thing is that the world is confronting a technological revolution on several fronts. AI and digital technologies, biotechnology, and sustainable energy. And it just so happens that these three revolutions interlock with each other. In fact, are feeding and accelerating with each other. And the frontier technologies are actually an area of great opportunity for us. Then I also took pains to explain, however, if we are going to seize these opportunities, we must remain open. Open to people, ideas, technology, business models. I made the plea that even as we protect Team Singapore, we take a longer-term view to supplement Team Singapore so that we can exploit the full opportunities in frontier technologies. I've also explained that because of the lack of trust and the contestation and the desperate need for each big power to get ahead of the other, because they're worried that these leads will be exponential. Making sure that our paradigm in which we operate Singapore, open to all powers, big, medium, and small, that this paradigm is under pressure. And I also tried to explain the way we make it work is to be open, transparent, fair, and to play it straight with all parties. I'm acknowledging that it is more difficult, and that everyone will say they don't want us, they're not trying to force us to make choices, but they would rather that we lean more towards one way or the other. I would say from experience, so far, we've been able to maintain this very careful balancing act, and it calls for credibility and it calls for unity. And I'll give you a recent example. I explained in Parliament, I think it was 2 weeks ago, right, that not only are tariffs being applied, but export controls are being applied, unilateral export controls that we are not obliged to enforce. Nevertheless, because we have national interest to have access to these technologies, it is important for us to maintain that reputation, and not just reputation, but in actual operation, probity, transparency, and reliability. So if a foreign company subject to rules which prevail outside Singapore operates here, it must not use its association with us to engage in subterfuge, deception, or backdoor channels for commercial advantage. So it calls for a very delicate, agile, but at the same time consistent approach. If we can do this, we will continue to have access to frontier technologies, and then where we will have an advantage, I often, maybe it's a dream, but the best place in the world where you can create a team of Russians and Ukrainians and Chinese and South Americans and Africans and Singaporeans, an effective team to take frontier technologies to the markets across the world. The most amenable, safe, conducive place should be Singapore. That's an example. Now, having said that, I also went through in my speech to say don't give up on multilateralism and international law. Yes, it is in recession. Yes, there is a geostrategic climate change. But I believe there are still many countries out there like us who want that system to work. And even though we no longer have the patronage or the support or the underwriting of major powers that used to do it, we can still make common cause. One regional grouping who has been quite enthusiastic to keep the system of multilateralism and international law going is the European Union. And I've had extensive discussions with them, and that's why I've said to the extent that the EU and ASEAN and maybe parts of Africa and South America still capable of signing free trade agreements, still binding ourselves to international law, because we still believe that in the long run, this provides for peace, prosperity, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. So I'm not giving up on that. So basically, the fundamental point is great danger, but once in a lifetime opportunities are opening. Don't panic. Don't give up our brand and the way we do things openly, transparently, competently, reliably, and trust and openness. If we can do that, I'm confident we can seize the opportunities ahead.
So Minister Maliki talked about stepping up our engagement with Africa. I believe we currently only have one resident mission in sub-Saharan Africa. And are there plans to open up more embassies, high commissions, or trade offices in growing and influential African countries like Nigeria and Kenya, as well as in South America? Beyond consular assistance, this could be another step towards diversifying our economic and diplomatic interests beyond the major powers, which is what I raised in my cut as well.
I thank Mr. Gerald Giam for the question. I go back to, I think Mr. Gerald Giam used to be a MFA officer. He understands the challenges with regards to manpower. And I think if we are able to have more resources, we will be able to do more. But the reality is that resources are limited, and we ensure that when we decide to establish or open a new embassy or a new mission in any city or any country, it's because we see there's potential for relationship to be established at a higher level. So we start off with ascertaining the potential for collaboration with a particular country. Africa is seen as an emerging country. We do have non-resident ambassadors already appointed in several African countries. And the non-resident ambassadors have done an excellent job for us. They started looking at various areas of collaboration, establish relationship with key leaders in those African countries, and you will see the evolution of us setting up missions in countries from starting from the work of some of our NREs. We will continue to review the African countries and potential for Africa as a region for us to see if we will be able to set up new missions in that area. I'm pretty sure when the time comes and when we see the potential being a lot more real, and we will then be able to make those decisions. But for now, I want to assure Mr. Giam that our NRAs have done an excellent job. We continue to also have systems where ambassadors in one particular mission are also accredited into another country. So it doesn't mean that without a mission that those countries are not taken care of. We continue to pay attention to the various accounts of the different countries in the African region as with any other region, and we continue to assess the extent to which we are able to set up new missions depending on the resources that are available.